We called it a shepherd boat. That is the word that lives in me now, 30 years after, and I cannot scrub it. Shepherd boat. A soft, dismissive word. The kind a pack commander uses when he wants to make his hunters relax before the sprint. You give a thing, a small name, and it shrinks to fit the name, and your hunters see the small thing you described and not the thing that is actually there. I know this, I have always known this. It is the oldest mistake in the Kaveth Codex, and I made it anyway. And now there are 4,400 names on the Thresh Memorial, and every one of those names is there because I chose a word. Let me tell you what the Thresh Corridor is. Because the humans have no archive of it, and the Kaveth archive is sealed to outsiders, and nothing written about what happened on that day is fully accurate. The corridor is a transit lane, 3 light minutes wide, pressed between the Arith shoals on the ventral face and the Dullen boundary on the dorsal. A natural channel through a dense medium zone, where most ships must reduce to sublight fractional speeds or risk shredding their hull geometry against the particle density. It is, in practical terms, funnel. Everything that moves through the inner reach and cannot afford the longer arc route around the boundary comes through the corridor. Civilian resupply runs, colony freight, water-heavy transports, emergency medical haulers. They come through in convoys, because the corridor strips away the faster escort classes that would normally run alongside them. The escorts are too fast for the fractional reduction protocols. They fall behind or take the longer route, and the convoys move through exposed. We had worked the corridor for 30 years. The Kaveth are not by nature a fleet engagement species. We are pack hunters, small, fast hulls, strike vectors at close range. We do not want to fight. We want to kill, clean, fast, asymmetric. A freighter convoy with no escort worth mentioning is not a fight. It is a harvest. You swing wide of the lead ships. Come down the flanks in 2 or 3 waves. Cut out the slowest haulers. And you are gone before any relief force could transit the longer arc. 30 years. And we had never lost more than a light strike hull to a lucky defensive shot from a panicked convoy captain. We knew the corridor. We knew its timing, its particle density shifts. The spots where a hull could gain a fractional speed advantage, the exact geometry that made dispersal impossible once you were committed inside the lane. We knew how to read Envoy at 40,000 kilometers and tell at a glance what the escort configuration meant about its threat level. The convoy was 18 haulers, large-hulled, water-heavy, slow to maneuver, exactly the kind of run the Reach colonies needed and the kind of run we had stripped to bones a dozen times before. The escort configuration was standard. 6 light defender hulls at the forward flanks, 3 at the rear, and 1 hull 1, trailing 2 kilometers back at a slow overtaking pace, as if it had fallen behind its formation and was catching up without any particular urgency. That trailing hull was what I called the shepherd boat. I want to be careful here about what the scanner actually showed us, because investigators who reviewed the incident afterward asked how we could have misread what we saw. I want to answer that honestly because the answer matters. The hull was approximately 1,400 meters in length. In the Kaveth classification system, a hull above 900 meters is designated a primary mass contact and requires a senior pack commander's direct authorization before engagement is approved. I had that authorization. I gave it myself, which is permitted under Kaveth strike protocol when a pack commander is on site and conditions are time-sensitive. The question the investigators were really asking was not procedural. The question they were really asking was, how does a 400-meter hull read like a shepherd boat? The answer is orientation and profile. The hull was end-on to us when we first acquired it, full end, perhaps 15 degrees off the direct bow line, but enough that the scanner's length estimate was constrained by the oblique angle. What we measured was cross-section, not length, and the cross-section reading was consistent with a heavy transport class. The hull had no visible weapons array on the forward profile. It had no active targeting emissions. It was running standard navigation lighting and nothing else. Its drive signature was slow and entirely consistent with fractional reduction protocols, and it showed no acceleration response when we acquired it on scanner, no countermaneuver, no emission spike. Nothing that said I see you and I am preparing. What it showed us was a slow hull with a clean profile that was trailing a convoy it apparently belonged to, running no weapons active signature, taking no evasive action, doing nothing at all. That was inconsistent with a heavy transport class, running behind a convoy, through the Thresh Corridor. I called it a shepherd boat, and I assigned it to the third wave. The Kaveth attack structure for a standard corridor harvest is 3 waves. First wave targets the forward defensive hull cluster. 12 Kaveth fast strike hulls against 6 defenders is not a difficult problem, and we had the angle and the speed advantage, and we had run this geometry many times. The second wave targets the haulers. Disable propulsion on the 3 lead freight carriers. Cut the convoy into segments. Let the second wave hulls do the precision extraction work. The third wave is cleanup. Trailing hulls, laggards, the shepherd boat. The third wave is the easiest assignment. Pack commanders. Send their younger crews there. They're less experienced hunters. Pairs who are sharp enough to be trusted with a live operation, but who have not yet earned the weight of a primary wave position. I assigned Commander Vetharis and 14 hulls to the third wave. Vetharis was young and capable, and I thought this would be routine. The shepherd boat would scatter or try to run, or perhaps fire a few defensive shots from whatever minimal armament a heavy transport carried, and Vetharis would collect it and add the hull to the extraction manifest. The first wave engaged. I watched from the command hull, positioned at the dorsal edge of the corridor, where I had clean scanner read on the entire battle space. First wave hit the forward defenders at the calculated angle, and the defenders did what defenders always do. They spread into the coverage pattern and began exchanging fire at a pace that was never going to hold for long. We had run this 17 times in the corridor alone. I knew the sequence. Watching the second wave prep for the hauler cut, checking the timing windows against the extraction margin, thinking about the water-heavy freighter at position 8. In the convoy, which I had earmarked as priority capture, because the manifest data suggested its cargo was the most valuable of the 18. And then I looked at the trailing hull again. It had not scattered. That was the first thing that stopped me. Every shepherd boat we had ever worked, light escort, straggler, convoy trailer, when the attack began and the first wave hit the front of the convoy, the trailing hull scattered. It was instinct, or something close to instinct. Even if the hull had orders to hold formation, the crew reacted to the sound of the engagement opening. They accelerated. They maneuvered. They tried to get inside the convoy's defensive envelope, or get clear of the lane, or do anything except hold their position. Response time, from first engagement to trailing hull movement was, in 30 years of data, between 12 and 22 seconds. Vetharas's third wave was already closing on a converging track. 42 seconds had elapsed since the first wave fired. The shepherd boat had not moved. It was not holding a defensive station. It was not accelerating toward the convoy. It was not decelerating or maneuvering. It was continuing on the same course, at the same speed, the same 2-kilometer separation from the rear of the convoy, as if the engagement happening 20 kilometers forward was something it was aware, but had decided for reasons of its own to simply observe. I said, over the command channel, Vetharis, what is your read on the trailing hull? Eris said, scanner still has it as a heavy transport class pack commander. No weapons active, no drive change. It is not responding to the engagement, I said. Is it possible it has not acquired us? There was a short pause. Then Vetharis said, pack commander. It acquired us at 43,000 kilometers. We have the intercept log. It has been tracking us for 11 minutes. I stared at the scanner display. The trailing hull was still on the same heading, still at the same speed, still not doing anything at all. It had been watching us for 11 minutes. It had watched us complete our positioning sweep, our formation spread, our approach to engagement distance. It had watched the first wave accelerate toward the forward defenders. It had watched the defenders begin their spread pattern, and it had done nothing. No emissions change, no drive response, nothing, I thought. Damaged, I thought. Skeleton crew, I thought. The crew is panicked and frozen at their stations. I thought of a dozen explanations that fit inside the idea of a shepherd boat, because I had already called it a shepherd boat and the name was in my head and the name was shaping what I was willing to consider. What I did not think was, it is waiting for a count. The second wave hit the haulers. I watched the second wave split into its cutting formation, the lead hulls going for the propulsion arrays on the 3 mid-convoy freighters I had designated. I watched the engagement opening, with the part of my attention that was trained on running a harvest, and with the other part, I was still watching the trailing hull, waiting for it to scatter, waiting for the response that was 20 seconds overdue, and then 40 seconds overdue, and then 60. The trailing hull turned, not toward the convoy, not away from us. It turned to face my command hull's position directly at the dorsal edge of the corridor, the full bow line swinging around in a deliberate arc. And the scanner. The scanner registered something I had never seen in 30 years of pack operations. The weapons array on that hull was not a Shepherd boat weapons array. The scanner was reading active targeting systems of a scale I had no reference for, was reading power conduit loadings consistent with a hull that had been running its entire weapons complement on cold standby, suppressed, masked, not emitting, for the entire time it had been in the corridor. It had suppressed that signature through our entire approach, through our positioning sweep, through the first wave engagement, through more than a minute of a live attack on a convoy it was part of. My scanner officer said very quietly, "Pack Commander, that is not a transport, I know. The weapons profile, I cannot match it to anything in the archive. I know, it is targeting us, all batteries. Targeting lock on your command hull is finer than anything I have ever seen come off a weapons array at this range," I said. "All waves, disengage. All waves, disengage now." I said it on every channel simultaneously, clearly with the Wave Commander confirmation protocol. I want to be absolutely clear. I gave the disengagement order before a single Kaveth hull had been destroyed. I understood in that moment the trailing hull was not a Shepherd boat, and I did not want to find out what happened next. The third wave disengaged. Vetharis pulled his 14 hulls back cleanly and fast. Good execution, no hesitation. The second wave began to pull out of the hauler cut, and most of them made it. And 3 were slow to respond because they were mid-engagement with propulsion arrays, and the crew reaction time cost them seconds they did not have. The first wave, forward in the engagement, was still trading fire with the defenders, and had not yet received the channel wide signal because they were in partial comm blackout from the particle density in the forward section of the corridor. Trailing hull, I will not call it a Shepherd boat again, fired its first shot. I want to describe this carefully because precision matters and because imprecision has let the account grow in directions that are not accurate. The hull, the human warship which I later learned had a designation I could not then read on the hull markings, which I have since learned was the WSN Ashen Covenant, did not open with a broadside. It did not fire all batteries simultaneously. It fired one shot. A single directed beam from the ventral array, traveling through the Thresh Corridor's particle-dense medium, as if the medium were vacuum. Our doctrine held that dense medium zones degraded directed energy weapons at range. That doctrine had just been invalidated. The shot hit the lead second wave hull at the command section. The hull came apart in a clean transverse break at the command deck line, forward section tumbling. The after section continuing on its heading for approximately 2 seconds, before its automation failed. 11 seconds elapsed, the Ashen Covenant fired again. One shot, precise, a second wave hull that had turned to run and was accelerating hard. The shot caught it at the drive section. The drive section ceased to exist, and the rest of the hull ran on for 4 seconds on momentum before structural integrity failed. I was giving orders. I was spreading my command formation, calling my faster hulls to form a screen, trying to build distance. Every order took time, and the time I was spending on those orders was time the Ashen Covenant was using to fire again. Every 9 to 13 seconds, always one shot, always a different hull, always a critical system hit, always precise. There was no broadside, no moment where we were engulfed in fire and light. It was quiet, methodical. The Ashen Covenant was doing with one deliberate shot what I had always done with a wave of hulls, and it was doing it at a pace that felt, I do not have a better word than this, considered. As if the rate of fire was not the maximum possible rate but a chosen rate. As if the Ashen Covenant had decided, that 9 to 13 seconds between shots was the appropriate interval for this particular engagement. I drove my command hull to maximum fractional speed and ran for the dorsal edge of the corridor, where the particle density was highest, and where I told myself the weapon's effect might degrade, might give us some interference, might make the shots less precise. I pulled 22 hulls into my running formation and drove them hard, and I watched the scanner, and I watched the Ashen Covenant come about to follow at the same unhurried speed it had maintained throughout. And I thought very clearly, it is not chasing us. It does not need to chase us. It simply needs to be in the corridor while we are also in the corridor. The corridor is bounded. Scanner officer counted the Kaveth hulls as they stopped appearing on scanner. It is a thing scanner officers are trained to do. Passive battle damage assessment. Maintaining situational awareness for the pack commander. My scanner officer did this very professionally and very quietly, calling out the tally at regular intervals, and I could hear in his voice the exact moment. The tally stopped being a report and became something else. I could hear the second when the counting stopped being professional and started being a sound that had no name in our language. I did not tell him to stop. I kept listening. I needed to know 112, 138, 190. We had entered the corridor with 440 Kaveth hulls. The largest pack assembly I had ever commanded, drawn from 7 different operational zones. Because the convoy manifest I had acquired suggested the water-heavy freighters were carrying more than water, were carrying materials for a colony expansion that I had been authorized to interdict. 440 hulls. I had been proud of that number. I had thought, standing at the command station before the engagement began, that no convoy escort configuration could face 440 Kaveth pack hunters in the Thresh Corridor and survive. 211. The Ashen Covenant was firing once every 9 to 13 seconds, one shot, one hull. We were running, and it was following at the same speed it had maintained when it was trailing the convoy, which meant the distance between us was not increasing, which meant the firing solution was not degrading, which meant the interval between shots was a matter of the Ashen Covenant's choice, and nothing else. I had a thought then that I have never been able to dislodge. I cannot verify it, but I believe the Ashen Covenant was counting, not in the way a fire control system counts targets, not a targeting algorithm cycling through acquisition and lock. I believe the crew, whoever stood at the command position on that warship and made the decisions that governed this engagement, counting my hulls the way a pack commander counts a prey herd. Taking inventory, knowing the number at the start and watching it diminish and choosing a rate that would see the work completed before the exit point of the corridor. I believe it knew, from the moment it acquired us, 11 minutes before first engagement, how many Kaveth hulls had entered the corridor. I believe it had been waiting to be certain they were all inside. 287. I made a decision. I will not call it a tactical decision, because it was not tactical. I split my running formation into 3 groups in diverging arcs toward the Aerith, Shoals side of the corridor, hoping the geometry would force the Ashen Covenant to choose a target group and allow 2 groups to exit while it engaged the third. The Ashen Covenant did not change course. It continued on a heading that was mathematically equidistant from all 3 groups. Fired at the left group, then the center group, then the right group, 1 shot each, at the 9 to 13 second interval, cycling through us as if the 3 groups split was something it had anticipated or simply did not care about. The tactical signature was clear, and I understood it watching it happen. The warship did not prioritize the largest hull, the most threatening, the closest. It cycled. 1 from here, 1 from there, geometrically distributed so no cluster-faced concentration of fire that might allow any portion of my force to feel less targeted than any other portion. Every hull was the priority. Every hull would be accounted for, 340. My command hull hit the exit point at the dorsal end of the corridor, and I brought thrust through into open space. I let myself take 1 full breath. The scanner range expanded from the cramped corridor geometry to the full medium-range display. I could see the exit point behind me, and the Kaveth hulls still inside the corridor, and I could see the Ashen Covenant still inside, still at its chosen speed, still firing. I did not leave. I know that is not a rational statement from a pack commander who had an obligation to report what was happening. But there are things that exceed rational accounting, and this was one of them. 362. 379. Some Kaveth hulls inside the corridor were running back toward the southern exit, took them directly past the convoy they had been attacking. Past the defenders and the haulers, which were still there, still holding formation, still continuing on their heading exactly as they had been when we arrived. The convoy had not scattered. The convoy had not accelerated. It had maintained its heading, its speed, its formation, as if the engagement happening in the space behind it was something it had no need to respond to, because the thing behind the convoy was not a threat to the convoy. The thing behind the convoy was dealing with what threatened the convoy. 399. 408. A Kaveth hull came through the exit point near me. Third-wave hunters from Vetharis's group, hunters I had trained. And they pulled alongside my command hull and said nothing, and I said nothing because there was nothing to say. We watched the scanner together. 417. The Ashen Covenant came through the exit point. At the same speed, no surge, deceleration, no alteration in its bearing or its drive signature. It had cleared the corridor. The last Kaveth hull inside had been collected, and it was outside now in open space. And so were the 20 survivors of the 440 that had entered. It did not accelerate toward us. It settled on a new heading. Not toward us, not toward the Kaveth operational zones, toward anything I could immediately identify, and, after approximately 40 seconds, it fired one more time. The shot went past my formation and hit a Kaveth hull at extreme range, a standby unit from a different pack that had been running silent near the exit point as a reserve element, a hull that had not participated in the engagement. The Ashen Covenant had known it was there. The shot, at a range that our doctrine said was impossible for directed energy weapons, hit cleanly. Then the Ashen Covenant settled onto its heading and continued. That heading, when I resolved it fully on the expanded scanner, pointing toward the inner reach, toward whatever port the convoy had departed, toward whatever home the convoy was eventually going to return to. The Ashen Covenant was not staying to finish us. It was going home. It was going home because it had done what it came into the corridor to do, which was escort a convoy through the Thresh Corridor and deal with whatever threatened the convoy. We had been dealt with. Contact resolved. That is the phrase I found 15 years later in a translated human operational log. 3 paragraphs on the Thresh Corridor interdiction. It is not in the human naval histories as a notable engagement. It is listed, if it is listed at all, under a general operations log entry for the WSN Ashen Covenant. Convoy escort, Thresh Corridor, contact with hostile pack element, contact resolved. 420 hulls, 4,400 names on the memorial, contact resolved. The question I come back to is not how. I understand the how in general terms. A warship operating in suppressed emissions mode, carrying weapon systems our archive had no entry for, capable of directed energy fire, through dense medium particle fields, our doctrine said was impossible. Running targeting precision our classification system had no category for. The how is a sequence of capabilities I did not know existed, and that the Kaveth archive apparently also did not know existed. The question I come back to is, how long held that hulls and trailing convoys through the Thresh Corridor? Not that hull specifically, the class of hull, the approach. Trailing a convoy at 2 kilometers separation, running suppressed, waiting for pack hunters to commit to the engagement before turning to engage. That is not improvised. That is not a response developed after I attacked the convoy. That is deliberate operational posture that requires planning, requires specific hull capabilities, requires training and doctrine that was built and tested and refined and deployed. Someone had looked at the Thresh Corridor and the Kaveth pack hunting doctrine and the convoy vulnerability problem, and had built a solution. Send a warship. Don't send it as an escort in the normal configuration, which is visible and which causes pack hunters to avoid the convoy and wait. A softer target. Send it as a trailer. Send it looking like a shepherd boat. Let the pack hunters catalog it as low threat. Let them commit their entire formation inside bounded geometry, where they cannot disperse, cannot retreat cleanly, cannot use their speed advantage against a hull that does not need to chase them. Let them close the trap themselves. We stopped running the corridor after that day. No official agreement, no treaty, no Kaveth Council decision. Pack commanders simply stopped proposing the corridor as an operational zone, and other pack commanders stopped asking. Why? Because the why was on the memorial and in the operational log and in the 20 hulls that came out of 440, and everyone who needed to understand had understood. The humans never announced the Ashen Covenant's presence on the Thresh route. They never issued a warning, never transmitted a notice to pack operational commanders that the corridor was now defended. They simply continued running convoys through it, at the same intervals, at the same speeds, with the same trailing hull at 2 kilometers separation that our archive, I checked, years later, still classifies as an unidentified heavy transport type. Still no weapons active signature on record. Still no targeting emissions logged. Still slow. Still unhurried. Still trailing. I do not know its name now. I do not know if it is the Ashen Covenant, or a hull like the Ashen Covenant, or 20 hulls like the Ashen Covenant. I do not know how many human warships are running the shepherd boat posture on how many human convoy routes. How many pack hunters in how many other corridors have decided they found a soft target and moved in and discovered the 9 to 13-second interval that they had been counted from the moment they entered the lane. This is what wakes me, the Thresh Memorial. Not the 4,400 names, though those wake me too. What wakes me is the question of how many corridors there are. How many shepherd boats, how many Kaveth hulls have entered a bounded lane behind a convoy that looked undefended and have not exited, and their non-return has been attributed to the particle density, to mechanical failure, any explanation except the right one. Because a warship that never raises its emissions signature and never files an engagement report that any hostile archive could acquire leaves no trace except the count of hulls that go in and do not come out. Contact resolved. I called it a shepherd boat. I will carry that for the rest of my life. And my life is long enough that I have had many years to understand exactly what I carried home from the corridor. Not grief alone, though grief is in it. Not shame alone, though shame is in it. What I carried home is the knowledge that has changed every operational recommendation I have made in the 30 years since, the knowledge I give to every young pack commander I train. The knowledge I cannot stop giving because I cannot stop understanding what it costs to learn it. The knowledge is this. There are things in the archive with no weapon signature, no targeting emissions, no data at all. And the absence of data is not evidence that the thing is what it appears to be. In the case of the humans, it may be evidence of the opposite. It may be the most dangerous signature of all. Shepherd boats, they are everywhere I cannot see.